Welcome to today's webinar on Significant Threat Landscape Trends for 2025. I'm Justine Siebke, and I'm joined here today by our Head of Marketing, Mary Yang, and Rob Brown, whose day-to-day job is working with customers to understand their endpoint management and security needs and help them solve their challenges through our Syxsense managed services. Today, we'll be covering what's hot and what's not in cybersecurity and looking at how resilience can help you tackle threats and reduce risk in 2025. Firstly, I'd like to thank Mary for graciously taking time out of strategy planning at Absolute Security to share her insights on key technology trends with us. Mary's expertise in cybersecurity is extensive and impressive. She has over 20 years of experience in the field with a particular focus on reducing risk and complexity for enterprises. Before joining Syxsense, Mary served as Chief Marketing Officer at Looking Glass Cyber Solutions, where her strategic leadership was instrumental in setting the company up for acquisition. But Mary's contributions to cybersecurity extend beyond the corporate world. At MITRE, she managed the National Cybersecurity Research and Development Center, collaborating with stakeholders to address complex cybersecurity challenges and develop innovative solutions. Mary is a true leader in the field, and you don't need to take my word for it, as I'm delighted to share that she has been featured in the SC Magazine Women in IT Security 2024 honorees. Well done, Mary. It's also my pleasure to introduce our second co-host for today's webinar, Rob Brown. Rob is a Vice President of Customer Success at Absolute Security following a 5-year stint at Syxsense, where he climbed the ranks from Director of Services to Chief Customer Success Officer. Rob's journey in IT and cybersecurity is nothing short of impressive. He started his career troubleshooting Windows 95 and NT4 at Intergraph, and he's now a key player in the world of next generation and endpoint security. Along the way, he's supported award-winning help desk software, managed cloud IT solutions, and even dabbled in green technology. And when he's not busy securing endpoints and neutralizing threats, Rob enjoys learning something new every day, and he's a passionate fan of rugby. So a warm welcome to you, Rob. Before we get started, some quick housekeeping notes. We expect our session to be around 30 minutes today, and we really appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule to join us and learn more on this important topic. If you've got anything you'd like to ask Rob or Mary, then please use the Q&A facility to let us know. We hope to have some time at the end of the session to go through questions, but if we don't, we'll follow up with any questions that you've asked individually. I'll be monitoring the chat facility, so let me know if you have any technical difficulties, but don't worry, we will be sending you a link to the recording in the next day or so. So with that, let me hand over to Mary and Rob so they can dive into today's topic.
Thank you, Justine. All right, we'll move right on in the presentation to our sort of overarching what's hot and what's not slide. We were thinking through this as we were planning out the content for the webinar today, and we really thought that there was a few ways to think about this. There's definitely the hot list, which we're going to really dive into today, but also just things that are part of your sort of everyday life that doesn't quite rise to the level of super trendy, super hot. I would think of this as everything in that middle column, right? Still a thing you need to worry about, but maybe not the thing that everyone's talking about these days anymore. This isn't going to be all that surprising to our viewers, probably. Third-party risk continues to be an issue, risk in general, as well as cybersecurity maturity. Where are you? Are you using the tools to the best of your abilities, to the best of their abilities? All of those things will continue to be a part of your daily lives, most likely into 2025. As well as phishing, budgetary pressures, the issue of hybrid work across your environment. All of those pieces, I think, will still continue to maybe not struggle with, but try to manage as we move into 2025. But there was a few things that we definitely thought were a bit on the way out, so I'm going to cover that one next. Basic awareness. I know that there's just been a ton of focus on cybersecurity awareness, especially among the general employee population. I think that for the most part, the way that cybersecurity attacks have become more mainstream in the media today, we're actually starting to see some of this basic awareness fade away, right? A lot of folks know about things like multi-factor authentication, or at least a dual-factor authentication with their credentials. Those types of things, I think, pretty well covered. We could always do better, of course, but that's not the thing that I think everyone's going to be hyper focused on in 2025. The siloed organization is one that kind of goes hand in hand with something on our hot list, which is consolidation. We're seeing considerable platform consolidation and tool consolidation, and we really believe that that's going to help remove some of the silos that exist in organizations today. And so that entire idea of like that's your bucket and this is my bucket, that is hopefully going to be out the door fairly soon. Trusting open source is another thing that I think we are going to start to see just a little bit more scrutiny around open source technology, especially within software stacks, right? Thinking of things like the SBOM. And then skill shortages and staff burnout, those go hand in hand. That we'll talk through a little bit as we talk about AI, right? We're starting to see, I think, we'll start to see skill shortages, staff burnout, in some ways reduced because of some of the stuff that we've got on our hot list. So I'm going to go back to that hot list now, just at a high level before we dive in. Inevitable AI. You probably haven't been able to go a day or two without hearing the word AI this year. And I think you're going to hear that even more next year, if that's possible, maybe multiple times a day. So we call it inevitable AI. Automation and vulnerability exploitation as well. Consolidation, like I was talking about with the siloed organization. Litigation is a really interesting one on this list that I'm excited to dive into with a little bit more detail with Rob. The outsourcing piece, again, especially when you think about skill shortages within an enterprise too. And then cyber terrorism and resilience. So I'm not going to do too much about each of these here because I want us to dive into the slides and just get going. Right. Okay. So inevitable AI. It's everywhere, right? I can't imagine a hot or not list for 2025 without AI. I think one of the things that's probably going to be most top of mind for folks is AI as part of cybersecurity attacks. Really thinking through things like enhanced ransomware with AI, where cyber criminals are using AI to amplify or sort of improve the speed to market, so to speak, of that AI, as well as things like the better written phishing emails, right? More compelling voicemail messages with, audio deepfake technology, all of that stuff to try to get a leg into an organization. I think another thing that becomes really critical with AI on the cybersecurity front is the supply chain technology piece, right? If we think about the Blue Yonder attack recently, how that's affecting other organizations, right? It wasn't like these retail outlets, these major coffee retail outlets all over the globe were hacked. It was this vendor that they had within their stack, and that's making it, nearly impossible for them to pay their staff without having written checks. So those types of disruptions, I think we're going to start to see more with AI. And then for Rob, because he's so much on the front lines with our customers, I wanted to get your thoughts on, how can our viewers today combat some of this stuff, and what do you think that they should be doing to sort of fortify their defenses against these types of attacks?
Hi, Mary. Yeah, that's a great question. Well, the week before Patch Tuesday is usually the week where we get to decompress. We get to look at what we've done for our managed services customers and how we can improve. And this week, we've actually spent a lot of time actually help educate our customers on this indirect threat, obviously through Blue Yonder. And what we've been designing is an element of automation that allows us to accelerate both the scanning, the detection, and the remediation of threats that come through, like the Blue Yonder, which is known as a weaponized threat. Being able to automate that actually is going to really improve and increase the speed from it being announced to it being resolved. And actually, we're learning a few things about those companies that we're working with that they probably didn't know themselves. So, for example, those organizations actually found out through the tier outlets, the tool sets they're using weren't actually telling those companies about the threat. They were actually finding out through the news. And so what we've been building is playbooks within our technology that can identify those weaponization, those threats that are weaponized. So within 2 to 3 hours of that threat being weaponized, there is an automatic response taken by the technology to begin the scanning and the remediation of those threats.
That is incredible, Rob. That's so cool. That actually leads us straight into our next hot topic, which is automation. I think that's a fabulous way to use automation to kind of combat some of this stuff with AI. I know that a lot of organizations are still trying to figure out their sort of AI policies. And so there's maybe a little less appetite right now to use AI to combat AI, but you can certainly use automation and you have the tools sort of do the work for you, like while you're sleeping, for example. So I think that's super interesting. And that's exactly why automation is one of our hot topics. We think that we're going to see more of this as AI ramps up, as those AI attacks ramp up. According to some Omdia research that came out a little earlier this year, 79% of the survey respondents that they polled viewed automated remediation capabilities as important or mission critical. And so that's really goes right to talking to what you were talking about, Rob, with the playbooks that you're developing. I think one thing that is also interesting on the automation piece that we've sort of started to see more of is the API picture, right? There's certainly the automations that you were talking about with building playbooks and sort of orchestration and automation tools, right? But where do you see APIs fitting into this automation picture?
Well, APIs allow you to take a much broader integration into your different technologies. And to give an example of the response I just mentioned there, you may have something in a more wider, more geographically based organization. You might have change control. Now, change control is typically where you need to fill in some forms that say, this is what I'm going to be patching, what I'm going to be remediating. It goes off to a team. They go ahead and they approve that inside a form. That form goes to the IT, and then the IT duplicate the patches, the devices, the start time, the end time inside the tool set. And I think APIs are going to really help drive tool sets in 2025. So you have your change management tool where you're putting all the effort into the process. Why not have that drive the technology that actually does the remediation? This doesn't make sense to me to duplicate all that work in actually creating the actual tasks, the schedules, etc., that has already been done in another tool. So I think APIs are going to be very, very important if you want to streamline the entire process.
That's fascinating. I love that. Well, I think that we'll probably have more conversations about that as the year goes on. I agree. That feels like a no-brainer. All right. our next hot topic, vulnerability exploitation. So one thing that we saw actually over the course of 2024 that we think is going to ramp up in 2025 is vulnerability exploitation. For several years now, things like phishing and credential stuffing, or buying credentials off the dark web, those were the primary initial access vectors for a lot of the cyber attacks that we were seeing. It's one of the reasons why security awareness became such a hot topic over the last few years. But what we've actually started to see over the course of 2024, and what we think we'll see into 2025, is actually an increase in vulnerability exploitation. We saw at RSA this year, one of the founders, I believe, of CrowdStrike, or Mandiant, I believe it's Mandiant, I apologize. They were talking about how exploitation of 0 days became one of the leading attack vectors that they were seeing across their research, and that was a bit new. For the most part, vulnerability exploitation had been going down the sort of rankings in terms of ways that threat actors were getting access, but we're starting to see that change. We think part of that is likely because of things like AI and automation, right? As well, like if those tools are available to us, they're also available to the cyber criminals and these bad actors. And so they're able to sort of speed to market how much they can do using these tools. And I wanted to just get some thoughts from you, Rob, given that you've got these tools that are also available to cyber criminals, what are some of the things that our listeners today can do to reduce their risk of vulnerability exploitation?
Mm-hmm. I think one of the biggest mistakes that are made today is where we assume vulnerability management is patch management. In that, patch management's been around since Windows NT days. The vendor has acknowledged that there's a bug, a vulnerability, and they provide an update for it. That is only 50% of vulnerabilities that we have today. There is another type of vulnerability called a security vulnerability. And that can be as simple as a device with no antivirus, a device with misconfigured firewalls or no firewall, local user accounts that don't have a password. And so assuming that these threats, these exploitations, these weaponized attacks only come through the patch management route, I think is a big mistake. I think what you need to do is you need to combine those two together and actually have patch management and security threat monitoring, detection and remediation as one unit. Now, the challenges sometimes you have is the patching of your environment and the security of an environment is two different departments. And they need to work together really closely if you're going to combine those two elements into an effective strategy.
I think that makes a ton of sense. I think we're going to talk a little bit more about that in a few slides. So I'm not going to dig too deep because I think that you've got some more information there that you can share. We'll move on to our next hot topic, consolidation. We're starting to see this, and I'm sure that you are too, as our listeners, the cybersecurity industry, lots of M&A this year, which feels a little bit not unusual, but a bit new, given that 2023 was really a much quieter year from an acquisition and merger standpoint. We started to see a few of these come through, Cisco's acquisition of Splunk, Thales' acquisition of Imperva, Sophos acquiring SecureWorks, right? All of these big vendors are starting to consolidate again. And I think that that's really going to be something we start to see as we move into 2025 as well. There's a bit here around, both acquiring technologies that are complementary, but this sort of need for a more integrated, full-featured platform offering from some of these vendors. I think that's going to become really important as folks think about, how they manage through some of those acquisitions, whether or not those tools are going to be integrated enough at the end of the day to be worthwhile. But would also just love your thoughts, Rob. Are you seeing, customers dealing with this? Are they having issues as they work through some of the consolidation of their vendors?
Yes. As part of my customer success role, I am involved in several, companies that are being acquired. Some of our larger customers are being acquired by even larger companies, and I can see the internal workings of that company, that incumbent company, using the established platform as the tool set for both management of devices, patch management, and security vulnerabilities. And I think one thing that we've learned quite quickly is that some of those larger platforms that are maybe premise based, maybe focused on one particular operating system, like Microsoft, for example, don't have all of the API integrations and some of the automations that some of our customers are actually using. And I think it's very important that we provide an education to those other companies that the way that they've done it and the way they've always done it might not actually necessarily be the future, especially if you've got some of this next gen technology that is incredibly effective in actually resolving vulnerabilities before the IT gets to his work at 9 o'clock in the morning. And so I always like to say to our customers during our customer success meetings is that there is a bravery test. You do need to say, look, there is better ways, and potentially we hope that those incumbent companies will actually take good advice and actually look at some really great technology that's used, especially that is very, very agile and so deeply integrated into the other technologies of those companies.
All right. Let's move on to our next one, because this one is pretty juicy. Litigation. And if you're like me, you're thinking, yes, lawyers, of course, they're always around. But I think what we're starting to see, especially in the IT and cybersecurity space, is more litigation, both from governments holding enterprises accountable, as well as users or customers holding enterprises accountable, technology companies accountable. Of course, it's hard to talk about this topic without thinking about things like the Uber CISO, SolarWinds, even just the CrowdStrike and Delta Airlines operational sort of disaster earlier this year, where now there's litigation between those companies coming through. A lot of this, as these attacks become more mainstream in the media, people are starting to say, hey, that's not acceptable, right? And they're either going to their elected officials to try to move forward on a broad sort of government against the enterprise case or something else. And I think we're going to start to see more of these. We're going to start to probably see class action lawsuits coming through. People are starting to be more worried about their online security and their data privacy. These are just some of the things that we think are going to really start to sort of be part of that cyber conversation in a way that it hasn't before. And I wanted to get your thoughts, Rob, as you're talking to organizations and customers. Do you get the sense that they're also thinking about the potential legal issues that they might have to deal with if they, come under attack?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I do, and I actually see it from two standpoints. I've got the standpoint that the company can actually be impacted, but also the personality, the people inside the company can also be impacted as well. And so protecting the reputation on both sides, I think, is essential. Now, governance and compliance isn't new. We've in the UK, we have a governance for our retail companies, our customers, called PCI DSS, and it's about audit trail. It's about making sure that you're covering all of the security protocols over time. And actually, one thing that I encourage our customers to do is to do something even though there isn't anyone watching. So you're putting in the effort to create the data, and usually an auditor wants to know, what does your environment look like right now? They want to make sure that when the audit's taken place, you pass you pass everything, you tick all the boxes. But they're also interested in the last 6 months. They want to know, over time, have you maintained that? And that's where I say you should continue to maintain that audit trail, even if no one is asking for it, because in the case of something like a breach ever does happen, you can actually prove that your processes were followed, and that if there was some kind of weaponized attack that was beyond anything that you could have proactively done, you have the evidence for it. And I think that's very, very important, both from a company and a personality perspective, so that you're able to prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that any kind of weakness in your process wasn't to do with something that you were dealing with. It was something else.
Yeah, that's a really smart recommendation. I think we've talked a little bit about how we think about sort of continuous patching and continuous monitoring, but we're not necessarily thinking about the reporting and the sort of evidence that can go into the fact that you are doing that and you are keeping up with that security posture on a regular basis. So I think that is a great tip for folks who are listening to us today. If it's not something that you're doing already, happy to talk you through what we mean by that. Reach out. But if you can start doing that, highly recommend that you do. We'll move on to our next topic, outsourcing. Obviously, if many of you are listening today, I'm sure that you're facing things like not enough staff on hand to do all the work, not enough skilled staff. Even if you can find bodies, they don't really have the skill sets that you need to get the things done that you need to get done. And we really think that part of the answer to this is going to be outsourcing, right? Whether that's to managed services providers or managed security services providers, or whether that's to, a whole like outsourced offshore organization that's going to run your IT infrastructure for you. I think there's going to be quite a bit of this happening in 2025. There's also this component around outsourcing that's going to help reduce, your operational costs, right? So there's benefits from a budget standpoint associated with, being able to outsource that and not having to necessarily pay for people's benefits because that's being handled by the provider instead of by your organization. We think that this is going to really start to ramp up over 2025. We've already started to see some of this come through with organizations moving to managed services offerings, either providers or with a technology vendor. Would love to get your thoughts, Rob. Are you seeing this happen as well within the customer base where folks are turning to, more specialized skill sets?
We are, Mary. In fact, this year we've never been so busy with managed services. And in fact, we help remediate over 1 million vulnerabilities a month for our global customers. And when we onboard our customers, we ask, what made you choose to outsource? And it's usually always this answer, which is the company is investing in a patch management strategy, and that patch management strategy usually requires someone to run it, to be responsible for it. And that person is hired, and as soon as that person is hired, they have 5 other jobs to do, whether that's changing printer cartridges or paper, or seeking, going to the CEO and looking after his laptop, desktop, Mac, for example. And so the focus is reduced significantly enough to to say that that is not now that's not effectively being managed. So I think it's very important that when you are looking, if you are going to look to outsource your patch management, you want to provide some rules around the strategy, and then have the ultra focus, the hyper focus of that partner look after the risks for you, to design the patch risk profile, the scheduling, and then the monitoring, and of course that all important reporting of how the patching has gone, saved to secure network locations, so that anyone within the company can take a look to see how things have gone. And as like I said, usually the week before Patch Tuesday, we do have a moment to decompress and to look at all of these sort of lessons that we've learned, and provide all these reports. And of course, as soon as the Beyonder happened, we started refocus. Our customers were too focused on that particular threat, but it could only have been done because there was a team that is truly focused on that one goal, and that's ensuring the vulnerabilities in your organization are remediated effectively.
I think that's a really interesting point you make there, Rob, about how, there are going to be attacks like Blue Yonder that come up time and time again, right? We're just live in that world now, and if you're not, if you don't have a sort of good, regular, thorough cadence for your patching and vulnerability remediation, then you add on this sort of, all hands on deck, Blue Yonder situation this week, earlier this year, some, VPN issues, firewall issues, right, that just end up taking up so much time. You get so much farther behind if you're not already doing the regular cadence. And so in some ways that also allows folks to be able to focus on really getting remediations in place for a high level issue without worrying that the rest of the enterprise is falling behind too.
Exactly.
Yeah. All right. The next topic we have is cyber terrorism. And it seems maybe a little crazy, but I think that we've really started to see over the last few years this creep up, right? In a lot of ways, when we thought about cyber terrorist attacks, they often happened with fringe organizations that were protesting some particular thing, like oil production or something like that, right? But what we started to see, especially with the Russia and Ukraine war, is that cyber criminals or bad actors that have connections to nation states are starting to attack other nations' critical infrastructure instead of attacking directly the government or the infrastructure of a government organization, which could lead to all-out war. They're starting to take down these critical infrastructure pieces that help power the country. And that certainly was what we saw with Russia and Ukraine, with the energy grid, with the telecoms. And we're starting to see that happen more and more. I think that that's going to continue to be an issue. We actually are in the midst of a little bit of that now in the US. The FBI and CISA just recently this week have been posting all over the place about how they believe that Chinese bad actors have hacked the US telecoms, and they're encouraging everyone to use end-to-end encrypted messaging apps like Signal or WhatsApp instead of their basic SMS text messaging services through their mobile phones. So this is absolutely ramping up. We think it's going to ramp up even more next year as we move into 2025. Rob, would just love some of your thoughts about, this feels like such a big thing that probably most organizations think, oh, it's not going to happen to me. It's not going to matter to me because I'm not important enough to be, the target of a cyber terrorist attack from China or from Iran or wherever. But because we're starting to see this in the critical infrastructure space, a lot of companies sort of fall into that world. Give us your thoughts on how they might how they should be thinking about combating that?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think the simplest thing is to sort of get a tabletop exercise and plan and rehearse those types of scenarios. Some of the biggest challenges you have is the ownership of an organization doesn't always go through a single person. You've got your desktops, you have your laptops, you have your servers, you have your virtual servers or your cloud-based servers, you have your security teams. I think it's very important that collaboration with those teams around a single goal of protecting the organization is essential. And I think sometimes, especially with the Blue Yonder this week, I've seen departments think that they are more important than others, and some things they're less involved than others. Some of them are taking action, proactive action, to protect the organization, and something that they're purely there to report and to make decision. And I think that some of the biggest challenges you have isn't necessarily always the technology. The technology is on everything. Then you have a sort of a single data set, but it's the personalities of the people that are running and managing those that I think is very tricky to sometimes to maneuver. And so planning and regularly reviewing how you're going to update your organization proactively. Okay, automation is awesome for that. Have the automation take care of backups prior to patching, so you have a really good disaster recovery scenario. And then if it comes down to the people, potentially screening employees just before they are hired to make sure that they are safe and knowledgeable, and that will stop the man in the middle attack, I think, substantially.
Yeah, I love that piece about sort of working together, and it's so interesting because having been part of some of these tabletop exercises, and then also having not been part of some of them, sitting in the marketing and communications functions, often people are like, well, what do we need that for, right? We're really just focused on recovering this attack and getting things back to operational, but someone's got to do the communications out, someone's got to manage that reputational harm that we were talking about earlier. And without working through that all together in a collaborative, cohesive way, you just start to get a little bit of like tugging this, someone thinks that, and then you're spending so much time focused on these interpersonal issues versus fixing the issue, like really recovering from the attack or the incident.
Yeah, precisely.
Yeah. All right. So our next and last topic is resilience. And I think when we're talking about resilience, you can kind of see a thread of this in everything that we've already talked about today. There's this sort of IT resilience, the operational resilience of your business. That's a lot of what we're talking about, and in a sort of all-encompassing way, right? The reason that a cyber attack can be so disruptive is that it takes down your operations. If we think about things like the Change healthcare hack from a few years ago, if we think about not a cyber attack, but an operational issue, an IT issue, the CrowdStrike and sort of blue screen of death situation incident earlier this year, that was all about operational irresilience, I suppose, and not being able to get back up quickly and not having systems in place to really work through these things. We're in this phase where I think people are starting to become hyper focused on how security is not just about making sure you've got MFA on, but how security can be an enabler for business continuity. And Rob, I just want to get your thoughts. Like, are you seeing this come through with customers? How were they in, and what were they thinking about post sort of CrowdStrike Microsoft incident earlier this year?
Well, actually, I think resilience is key to getting an organization back up on its feet. But I like to go back to the patching or the remediation strategy, like the strategy that allows you to roll out safely the remediations in a way that is both very, very efficient and fast, but with the safeguards involved that allow you to do that in a very safe way. And I am reminded of a particular meeting around the balancing of resilience and recovery when we were talking about the weaponization of a threat that is very, very serious, that needs to be deployed very, very quickly. And the roadblock was, oh, we can't patch the servers because the servers have to have backups. And the backups are scheduled by somebody, and that's in a different department, and that might take 45 minutes to an hour to get the comms out, and everything is managed by email. So I just recommend, I said, why don't we have a playbook that takes a snapshot prior to patching? Remove the human element from that and have the playbook automatically create the snapshot for safety, perform the patching, which will resolve the vulnerability, and then send an email to say that the snapshot was taken, the patching was complete, and if required, go ahead and remove the snapshot. And I think if you have a tool set that has elements of automation like that in your organization, I think it really helps you to be more resilient everywhere. So in the event that something happened, you can go back to the snapshot. Even if you're not patching, why not automate the snapshot on a daily basis using that tool set? Therefore, if you ever should need it, the rollback can be very, very quick. But it's all around the speed in which you are able to resolve, but safely in a way that you're not deploying automatically everywhere. As we saw with the CrowdStrike, maybe that's not the best strategy, but actually have it in a phased way. Even if you're using a small time delay, wait 4 hours for the first round, wait 8 hours for the second round, wait 1 day for the third round, etc. It's still very fast, it's still very effective, but it's safer than going with everything deployed at once.
Yeah, I like that. That phased approach is so critical. Also, just anytime you're doing things that are sort of high risk, sort of high reward, right? In this example, taking it a little bit at a time is actually what gives you the lessons to say, okay, we can accelerate here, or we need to slow down here.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right. Well, that is the end of our hot or not list. This next bit here is just a little bit about sort of Syxsense. We are now an absolute security company. If you have not heard, we were acquired in September by Absolute Security. They are a they provide a modern, resilient architecture rooted in hardware. They're embedded in the firmware. They are able to offer, because of that being embedded in the firmware, they're able to offer endpoint resilience, application resilience, access resilience, as well as now all of the capabilities that Syxsense offers as well. And we're super excited to be part of Absolute. We've got materials on this. If you're interested in learning more, we'd love to chat with you. Just leave us a message. We'll also reach out in case you want to respond to an email to schedule a time to chat about this. But you'll hear more about it as the year goes on, I am sure. All right, and finally, to close today, we've got a few materials that you might want to scan and get. We've got an ebook covering what we believe is that sort of 2025 security forecast. Really interesting stuff. We dive into a lot more detail there than we could on this webinar today. And then we also do a 0 day to everyday podcast with our solutions engineers. You can see a little bit of those three guys' faces there. We do this at the end of every month. It's a bit of a roll up, really interesting, more technical discussion from those solutions engineers. So please check that out as well. And I know that we're pretty much up on time today. If you were not able to get a question in, we apologize. We will follow up with you afterwards. And just thank you guys all for spending time with us today.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you, Rob, so much. Some very interesting comments there. And as I say, we'll follow up individually on the questions and look forward to speaking with you in the near future. Thank you.